Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today I'm really excited to have Megann with us. We're at GCV Monterey 2025, and this is a place where we are learning a lot about how to do CVCs better. And Megann is going to help us learn a few more best practices. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the question I always like to start with, which is, what was your personal journey into corporate venturing?
Sure. I guess it starts probably college time frame. I was a biomedical engineer in college, and in the summers I would intern or work, I guess, in the tissue engineering lab, looking at how to tissue engineer heart arteries. And that lab actually spun out a company that's called Humacyte, actually now a publicly traded company, in the RTP, Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. And so I got some early experience in kind of early lab work, early science, how a PI at a university might start a new startup company, and then obviously watched its success from far away. I did not stick around for too long, but I got some of that early experience. And then when I graduated college, that's when I left Humacyte. I basically followed my friends to Washington, D.C., like I think many people in their 20s make decisions that way. And so I was looking for jobs for engineers there, and was a U.S. Patent and Trademark Office at the USPTO, and looking at patents applications in medical devices. And so I was there for about 4 years and really enjoyed the work, but I think everyone either treats the USPTO as a lifelong career because there's great benefits, and the work's pretty straightforward, or a lot of people go to grad school. So I started looking at different grad school options. As you can imagine, a lot of people at the US Patent and Trademark Office go into law and become patent attorneys, but I did not have any interest in that. I was still very much science driven. I was always more of a math and science person in general. And so I started talking to a couple people, and one of my friend's brothers was working in kind of a corporate development, business development role at a big pharma company at the time. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be on the business and strategy side of new technology. So I went back to school, to business school, and focused on strategy and health sector management when I was in business school. And my first job out of business school is actually at LabCorp. So I've been at LabCorp now for almost 14 years. And when I joined LabCorp, it was because I told my colleague, John Meltzer, who hired me, that's what I wanted to do. And we have a rotational program called the Leadership Development Program at LabCorp for MBAs. And, the point is to rotate and learn about different businesses or groups across the company. But I never ended up rotating. So, and I didn't think I would, but I think it was great to have the option. But I joined John's team, and it was the licensing team at the time. And that was a pretty, I guess, typical corporate development, business development role, kind of licensing, M&A. But what we were seeing at that time, it was kind of 2011, 2012, 2013 timeframe, was a lot of things that were changing, at least in the healthcare landscape, and definitely things that were changing with respect to diagnostics. So there was a couple patent decisions. People might have heard of Myriad patent decision that has to do with like BRCA testing. And then another one called Prometheus decision, which really impacted kind of how diagnostic companies were thinking about IP and patents and licensing. In addition to that, there was a lot of really new technology. When you think about when sequencing was actually getting to a place where it was more affordable, and some of the technology and the AI was starting to be able to do some of the computational bioinformatics work, was all kind of in that time frame as well. And so we were starting to see new tests that we call molecular diagnostics that, were on these sequencers that were super expensive. They had algorithms, and the payers did not know what to do with those tests. Reimbursement was just no longer incredibly straightforward. And I think providers and physicians were also pretty confused. So long story short, we stopped doing kind of straightforward licensing, straightforward acquisitions, and we're looking for ways to be more upstream. So like, how could we do, some sponsored research, for instance, and maybe if we were to sponsor some additional research or generate some additional data with a partner or academic institution, we'd have some sort of option to internalize it or take a license. But we were taking a more risk-averse, tranched approach to all of this novel technology. And at the same time, there was a lot of things happening in technology in general, and I think health tech and now what we call digital health, that we knew would impact either LabCorp or LabCorp's customers. And customers can be consumers, patients, providers, health systems and hospitals, payers and pharma. So we know that at some point these technologies are going to impact us directly or indirectly. And it's moving very quickly. And so that was why we started thinking, okay, in addition to sponsoring this research with some of these partners, how can we also keep an eye on some of this novel technology that we really considered strategic but also adjacent and not really necessarily our core business at the time. And so we were thinking through different deal structures and different ways to keep an eye on technology, and that's when we started making equity investments and started what is now LabCorp Venture Fund.
Very nice. And so the adjacency was part of the mission for that new corporate VC.
It definitely was, yeah.
Okay. So how did
early stage or adjacent, yes.
Okay, so early stage in the core business could also be, okay, very nice. How did you pitch it? Or was it someone saying we should do it, or you pitched it?
Yeah, it was the gentleman I mentioned previously and I that pitched it to our CEO at the time. And he had been the head of corporate development several years prior to that and had a legal background, was really interested in kind of deals in general as well. So at the time, it was actually a pretty easy sell. That has been something that I think we have been very lucky to have, is that we have always had an executive committee and executive leadership team that has been really supportive of the venture fund and our strategy and what we're doing. But it was really easy. And then I think also because the EC is our IC, our investment committee, they were always so intimately involved that I think they thought, because they were involved, it was something that they were doing too.
Yep.
And it's so much fun to talk about new, exciting technology. So I think a lot of our IC also think it's kind of a break from the usual grind a little bit as well.
It's more exciting. It's about the future building.
Yeah.
But EC is IC, it must be a big investment committee then.
We have actually our IC is bigger than our EC. So yes, it is a big committee. And that's okay with us. It's pretty cross-functional. The EC is comprised of what everyone's probably EC is, and we have our IT, our Chief Information Officer, our Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Officer, CFO and CLO, CEO. But then there is those senior SVP leaderships that are specialists in their area, or head of M&A, for instance, that we also think is important to have around the table when we're having these discussions.
But that's not easy to get so many people around the table every time you want an investment proposal. So do you do it on a regular cadence, or do you do it? Okay.
Yes, we start every year, probably in the November timeframe, looking at first our CEO and CFO schedule, and then kind of scheduling around that.
Okay. So. But that was like more of every 2 months, every 3 months?
Every month.
Every month, okay. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we use it, sometimes we don't, but we like to have at least a monthly meeting.
I think that's the key, which is if you have nothing to propose, you don't need to have it.
Right.
Which means you keep your meetings really exciting, because that's only when you have something to propose.
Yes.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Although we're getting to the point where there's less cancellations, and it's not necessarily only new investments, but follow-ons or insights, conversations like that.
Okay, but that still keeps them exciting and interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about follow investments afterwards, but maybe you can talk about how do you go about sourcing good investments and bringing that superpower from LabCorp to your portfolio companies.
Yeah. So my team's actually called New Ventures and Strategic Alliances. So we're responsible for bringing new science, technology, and innovation to LabCorp through partnership. So we're actually managing anything from sponsored research agreements, evaluations of new technologies or platforms, commercial collaborations, maybe co-development partnerships, licensing, in addition to equity investments. And so the way that we're set up is to be super flexible, to be able to do whatever partnership is mutually beneficial and makes sense for both parties. And what we've seen over the years, too, is that we used to talk a lot to the tech transfer offices at these universities. And we still do, but they've gotten really savvy about starting new companies. And so I think we did start the venture fund at the right time, because that is our best way of being able to fund, early research and early stage technology, into these companies that they're spinning out, where we would have maybe in the past done something like a sponsored research agreement with an option to license. So anyway, we're set up to be very flexible, and then we also work with all of our expertise across the company. We actually have, I think it's roughly 50 what we call business advisory teams. And these are comprised of our senior experts across an area of science or technology or medicine. So for instance, we have like an oncology business advisory, autoimmune business advisory, women's health business advisory. And then within some of those larger areas like oncology, there is a colorectal cancer business advisory team. And some of those business advisory teams are meeting monthly. Some of them are more ad hoc. But that is a way to bring those leadership sets, science, technical experts, medical experts, business owners, marketing, sales leaders, legal, our team together to really think about where are their unmet needs? What are we developing internally? We have a huge R&D group. What is kind of in the pipeline? What are we developing? Do we need to do freedom to operate searches? Do we have the freedom to operate? Do we need a license? And then also, in addition to looking at where we think there's unmet needs based on either standard of care or what we're seeing competitors doing, for instance, we're also looking at where there could be opportunities based on trends that we're seeing in the industry. And so we work really closely with all of our sales and marketing colleagues, as well as our R&D colleagues that are going to these conferences and that are reading the publications. In addition to that, our team is also, following all of the major publication sources. So there's something in healthcare called Genome Web Daily. And then there's obviously Nature and some of the big publications. They'll send out email updates about like what's new and what's coming out. So we have kind of a whole network of people within the company that are helping us source new opportunities, and kind of then based on the maturity of the opportunity, or if it is a early stage private company that happens to be raising money. We also work very closely with other venture funds and spend time like quarterly. We have standing quarterly calls with probably, I think it's like 20 to 30 venture funds that are also in healthcare and interested in investing in the same types of companies that we are. So we do a lot of deal flow sharing there at those meetings, even like diligence insights, especially if we regularly co-invest with a lot of those venture funds. And then, of course, like investment bankers. We benefit from being LabCorp too.
So I think there is one golden nugget you already mentioned, which is this regular meetings with other potential co-investors or already co-invested in the past. Mm-hmm. Is that something you drove? How did that happen? Because that's very powerful when you can bring syndicate players together with you for an investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are strategic minority investors. So we don't lead. And so it is very important for us to know, I think, other potential lead investors and co-investors. And when we started the fund around 2012 is really when we started tracking this as an actual fund. We did make some investments into funds, about 5 of them. And that was, I think a lot of funds do this. It's a great way to kind of get exposure to venture investing. We were very careful about who we selected, just kind of based on, again, areas of interest in the areas that they were investing in. And then we also tried to make sure that they were diverse. So a couple on both coasts, different stages. Some had a more digital health focus, some had more life science and diagnostics. And so It was a way to have kind of a diverse exposure right off the bat. And so our meetings with funds obviously started with the ones that we were LPs in, but we very quickly, our IC very quickly decided, like, we don't want to do too much indirect investing. We would really like to reserve capital for direct investing. And so sometimes those conversations were difficult with funds that are raising money, and they were regularly coming to us knowing that we were in some of these other funds, but saying, hey, listen, we have these business advisory team meetings, we have this size deal flow, and we're looking at a lot of similar companies, and we're willing to take these companies through our diligence process and share those insights with you. And so I think being able to show that even if we aren't an LP, we're still willing to have a mutually beneficial valuable relationship where we're adding some sort of value to them. And so I think very quickly we were able to convince funds to take these kind of quarterly or biannual, informal meetings with us to talk about deal flow. It also helped the more investments we started making, and the more meetings we started taking, definitely made an impact to our deal flow.
So it sounds like, and for the audience who are thinking about starting their own CVC, the fund of fund could be a really good way to onboard, to learn the job, to start to have a lot of investment opportunities coming to them. How would you think about if you were to start a CVC today with what you know? Is that one of the things you would have done even quicker, faster? How do you think about fund of fund when you're starting a new CVC?
Yeah, I don't think we would have done it differently, to be honest. I do think it's really helpful and a really good way to accelerate, kind of entering the venture space. The two of us that started the LabCorp Venture Fund are both science, first type people. So, we didn't have, we both went to, business school, but beyond that, we didn't have any financial experience. So we were learning as we go. We were taking a very science-first approach, which we still do, but we also didn't know what we didn't know. And so it was really great, not only from a deal flow perspective, because our deal flow was already pretty decent. It just wasn't for investment opportunities. But then once they realized, oh, well, we're willing to do investments too, that kind of started to pick up pretty quickly. Again, it's all about having conversations like this and going to conferences and making sure people know, especially your contacts that you already had. And I think we did benefit from already having a corporate development group that was having a lot of conversations in general or sourcing a lot of deals in general. But beyond the deal flow, really seeing how they were tracking investments, how they were calculating ROI, some of the KPIs they were tracking. We learned a lot from a couple of our venture funds, and we still do.
Anything that was very surprising to you?
Which from?
From learning from them, because clearly you had no VC background. I also didn't have VC background when I started TDK Ventures. The power law was a big surprise to me. I'm sure there were those things which you were very surprised.
I don't know if we were even surprised because everything was so new. I think there were ways that certain funds were doing something, doing certain things that we gravitated to, so we were comparing and contrasting how certain funds were tracking things or how they, ran their funds, how they ran their diligence. But since we were brand new, it wasn't surprising as much as we're like, we like that, we're gonna do that too, or we'll take this, we like that spreadsheet. And luckily one of them shared their spreadsheet with us. So we were,
cherry picking the best.
Yeah, which was pretty advantageous to us. But no, there wasn't anything that we were necessarily super surprised about, I don't think. They obviously have to do things in a much different way when it comes to being a lead investor and doing a diligence and having to really think about the financial return to their LPs that we don't have to do.
I see. Now I want to talk about your network of advisors. Clearly very helpful for assessing opportunities. How do you leverage that network of advisors potentially for helping your portfolio companies?
So with over 60% of our active portfolio, we actually have some sort of other formal agreement in place. So if it is an earlier stage company or technology, it might look like something like a pilot study or an evaluation, or maybe we are doing a clinical study and generating data for them or together for publication or a poster at a conference. As they are more later stage and thinking about commercialization or actually have something commercially available, we are talking to them about promotional opportunities or co-promotional opportunities and other kind of commercial collaborations. So, in addition to them helping with the diligence, they're also helping with these partnerships and have very active roles in these partnerships, whether it's, again, like the early stage R&D people maybe, or if it's later stage business owners, sales and marketing. In addition to that, we require a board observer role. And so we have 55 active portfolio companies. Not all of them have a board observer because some of them are very old.
Okay.
So that's one of the things we learned.
Over time. Yeah.
We did not always require a board observer role, but we saw pretty quickly that in the companies that we didn't have a board observer, we just didn't really hear much from them, especially if there wasn't an obvious partnership that was established almost immediately.
Yep.
So it did become something that we ended up requiring. And obviously, our team can't take every board observer role, nor do we think we should. So we do tap into that same network of expertise to take these board observer roles. So they're meeting with these companies quarterly. A lot of times they are responsible for a business, or they have business decision, making capabilities, very much senior leaders at our company. And even if they aren't kind of the only decision maker or business owner, they are senior enough at the company that they know everyone else at the company, so they're kind of the person who's on point for introducing the CEO or relevant leaders at the portfolio company to others at the company, as they need kind of different resources from LabCorp.
So in a way, you unlock the value of the mothership, including for the support on the board. And I think it's a golden nugget to actually have a board seat, to be building the intimacy with the company and get the learnings together. But you mentioned observer, so it sounds like it's a design choice to only take observer board seats versus full board seat.
Yes.
Can you talk about the pros and cons and what led to that decision?
Yeah. So I would say for the most part it's pros. Especially as a strategic corporate venture fund. We really created the fund for that strategic insight as a number one priority, and for working or identifying ways that we can work with the company or partner with the company early on. So knowing that is kind of the point of our fund, the board observer gives us that strategic insight and is that kind of mutually beneficial relationship without the fiduciary responsibilities. Our legal team felt very strongly about us taking board roles. And so I think that makes sense given we all work for our company, and if you have a fiduciary responsibility to another company, it becomes kind of a conflict. Most of the time not, but it could be. And so our legal team felt very strongly about the board observer versus the board role. I think the only kind of cons is that, we have been investing since 2012. As you can imagine, in some of these situations, we've invested quite a large amount of money, and, you don't have the same voting rights or decision-making rights as a full board member does. Sometimes, again, that can be frustrating, I guess you could say, especially when you are either a very close partner or a larger investor in the company. But again, it does just remove that conflict.
Yeah, I think it's even more true for the advisors you mentioned who work full-time in the mothership.
Yes.
That's even more sensitive. And I think it's also good for the entrepreneurs to know that clarity of fiduciary duty does not apply.
Right. Well, that and our team, as the corporate development team, even though we call ourselves New Ventures and Strategic Alliances, I think having decisions over exits, for instance, or especially if we might be a potential acquirer, it just gets to be a bit of a conflict.
But in case of an acquisition, I'm sure you, even though you're an observer, you still have to revoke yourself from the discussions related to that.
In most situations, our companies do have closed board sessions at the end of their board meeting. And so if they were talking about something that is under CDA with a competitor of LabCorp, they would certainly ask us not to be there and we would remove ourselves, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about follow investments and going back to the investment committee. What's your follow reserve strategy and how does it work in practice?
So we have always reserved capital for follow-on investment. I think at the beginning, though, I'm not even sure we thought about it that clearly. But, we invest early, so seed, Series A. So as you can imagine, and especially in healthcare, Series A is usually pre-commercialization. So, these companies are around for a while, raising multiple funds before exit. And I think to kind of maintain what we call those side letter rights, like the board observer role, and also, I feel like to maintain that relationship at the company, it doesn't have to be a significant amount of money. But I do think we're seeing, and especially the past couple of years, more and more, that other investors are always looking to see what the strategic's going to do. Are they going to continue to support this company?
Yep.
So it's put a lot of pressure on us.
It's like a signal.
Yes, it's like a signal. And so we've gotten to the place where we like to reserve, we don't even reserve a certain amount because I feel like so many of our investments are so different with respect to amounts and what's being raised in that round. But we like to come in at our pro rata share of the round. There are times when companies will ask for a super pro rata, or there might be some sort of more strategic, larger investment that is contemplated. We like to refer to that as more of like a business-initiated investment, and usually that is something that is done with a later stage company. Maybe there's some sort of proprietary or exclusive commercial collaboration, or even once or twice we've had a option to acquire. That is very, very rare, and I wouldn't say is kind of part of our strategic venture fund. It's more we can utilize equity investments in that way and do every once in a while.
And you mentioned M&A as a potential outcome. How do you think about it, both from the investment you make the first time, the follow strategy for that, and how do you get into the conversation at the right time? Because M&A is really about timing, isn't it?
It is, yes, yeah. And again, because the point of the fund isn't for us to acquire the companies, I think our diligence has evolved, though, as we've become more mature investors, to definitely want to understand what we think their exit would be. Who is a realistic acquirer here? I think that comes up in every diligence conversation. And sometimes LabCorp could be an exit or an acquirer. It's just not the point, and we want to make that clear. I think it makes other institutional investors nervous when a strategic comes in and wants to acquire or is taking too much of a round. So we definitely don't do that. But I think just having a seat at the table with the board observer, having these, collaborations where we're helping them generate additional data, we're giving them access to our experts, we're trying to accelerate their time to market, makes us a pretty realistic, acquisition target for them. They're comfortable with us. They could see who they'd be working with already. So I think just having that relationship and being a good partner to them, if there was an opportunity and it made sense for LabCorp, we're already kind of in those conversations. And so that's why I think the board observer matters. We do have side letter language that I know our portfolio company legal teams don't love, but it's evolved over the years, and I think it's important. We never ask for first right of refusal or first right of negotiation. Again, those are terms that make other investors very nervous. But we do ask for notification rights. So just like, please, we do not want to wake up to a press release that you were acquired and acquired by a competitor, right? Like, and very unlikely to happen.
You don't want to do so.
Right, especially with long-term relationships and a board observer role and partnerships. But, we just feel strongly about something like that. And, because we invest in such kind of strategic adjacent spaces, some people might not think that LabCorp would even be interested in, acquiring that company, but maybe we are.
Please ask me first.
We think it's actually very mutually beneficial because, again, we're not caught off guard, and therefore our CEO is not caught off guard. We are a public company, so we want to make sure we know what might be in a press release. But then at the same time, if LabCorp was interested in Notified, that's just another company that's at the table negotiating, and hopefully they can get the best deal.
Yeah, I think the right of first refusal is a problem because it forced a choice of one.
Yes.
And for investors investing, that's definitively limiting the potential for that investment.
Yeah.
I think the notification is actually adding a +1 potentially to a list.
Right. And of course, this legal clause is like this long. So I feel like everybody at first, when they see it, thinks that it might be some sort of try for first right of negotiation or refusal, but it really isn't. But I do think the notification is where we got comfortable, and then also what we think is beneficial to the company. And because, our team is actually, I don't know, we want the company to do really well. If we're not the best acquisition target, or the best acquirer, then we'll still get the return, so, either situation, we think is a good outcome.
But that's not an easy conversation at the beginning of the CVC to the mothership, right? So how do you convince, because the audience will probably have the same challenge where the mothership says, wait, I want the first right of refusal. So how do you convince this is actually not the right way to approach it?
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations like that. So the IC feels very strongly about us continuing to be a science-first, early stage, strategic minority investor. However, sometimes they do want those rights, or they'll be like, well, this seems like a large investment. And I'm like, well, $5 million in an $80 million round actually isn't that much. So we have to kind of manage expectations about kind of what the other investors might think when, we are asking for those types of terms. But, we really try not to, and try to get our IC comfortable with the fact that, again, if there is that high level engagement with multiple senior people at LabCorp and the relationship and the partnership is going well, it hasn't happened to us, knock on wood yet, where we don't know what this company is thinking.
I'm actually not sure this is wood.
Oh, is it not? Glass, it's under there. That we've been caught off guard or didn't know or weren't approached about something like that.
Now, there's something you said earlier, which I think is, I've never asked in previous podcasts, but given your background in patents, I should ask. You mentioned about freedom to operate. And I know many people are saying that if they have a patent, it means they have the right to do what's in the patent. Actually, it only gives a right to stop someone else to do.
That's what it really is, yes.
Exactly. Can you talk to why investors should care about freedom to operate? And clearly in medical space, but it's true in deep tech as well. Why is it so important to think about it early versus too late?
I think there's two ways that you can think about it. Sometimes these companies are so early that all they have are patent applications, right? So we don't actually have a very clear picture of their freedom to operate. And in those situations, we still are looking at their IP. We're still talking to our IP counsel and thinking about, if they were to get this approval, or what patents are out there that would prevent them from getting, most of this approved. So we have like a pretty decent idea of, what they might have protection over, what they might be able to secure from an IP standpoint before we invest. But a lot of times we are investing too early to necessarily know. But I think in general, it is certainly very important to your value. So, I think if you don't have a clear freedom to operate, or if you haven't established how you diversify yourself against the rest of your competitors or companies in the space, then I don't know how one attributes the value you're expecting.
Sometimes just asking is already helping framing the way that the entrepreneurs will start to drive the value. So I want to talk about, so you co-founded the CVC, and you had this fund of funds strategy that allowed you to learn very quickly and from multiple funds. But how did you think about the early recruitment in your team? Were you thinking, because of the fund of fund, we can recruit internally only, plus we have advisors? Or did you look at external? How did you think about the early stage of your recruitment?
Yeah. In the early stage days, I had mentioned the leadership development program. And so we had, a new crop of MBAs joining LabCorp every year. So I would say at the beginning, most of the people on my team were from this LDP.
So you leverage an existing program really smartly.
Right. And, I, at least in the early days, tend to hire people that I had a lot in common with and that had similar interests as me. So all from the same business school. And then, all very interested in the same, got really excited about science and technology and innovation, which I think is great. Again, seeing that we sit within R&D. So we report into our chief scientific officer.
Okay.
So again, very innovation first mindset, and everyone on the team, especially at the beginning days, were very jazzed about technology. But I quickly came to realize, I was like, we need somebody that cares about the numbers. We can't have everyone that wants to just look at new technology all day, you know? And so I did become more focused and disciplined about thinking about how can we add diversity to the team with respect to skill set. So definitely have some people on our team that have pure financial background now in the investment banking space, derivative space, PE type space, which has been really great.
And is that something you would recommend to the audience to think even earlier as you start the team to have this diversity of, in this case, science and finance, or was it something that comes when it starts to feel like you really need it?
I mean, if you have the resources, it would be great to always have, both. At the time, our team was really small. And so, it wasn't kind of the top priority. But as we got larger and had a lot of investments to manage, it was an absolute must. I think, at a corporate, you also can take advantage of other, functions across the company as well. So I could envision that if you don't have the resources to hire someone to do kind of a lot of the financial work, hopefully you could partner with your finance or accounting team. And even consider it as some sort of kind of development opportunity for one of their people. Because I know we get a lot of the leadership development rotators through our team. We get approached by a lot of other functions about how people can help with diligence or how they can partner with our team and get that exposure to kind of some of the exciting things going on in healthcare as development opportunities. So I would frame it as that if you don't have the resources to get that in.
Actually, many of the interviewees on this podcast mentioned if you want to get into a CVC, offer to help out with the due diligence.
Absolutely. We'll see that. And that is how most of the people that are on the team today have gotten into the team is I hire a lot internally. And that's because our team is probably the most cross-functional team across all of LabCorp, because we work with every area of business and science and medicine, because they want the fund to support the entire enterprise. And so everyone has different strategic priorities and unmet needs and gaps. So we are regularly communicating across all the businesses. It's an important piece of our job. If someone's already been at LabCorp for a couple of years, they kind of already have that network. And they'll continue to build it, but that's kind of the hardest piece. There's plenty of people out there that are excited about new science technology, but that don't necessarily have the network. So I try and do a little bit of both, but we've we've pulled people out of the lab that we're developing our microbiome tests that are now on our team. So we have people with masters in science and PhDs. We have a bunch of MBAs. We have an MD. We're trying to get a lot of cross-functional and comprehensive expertise on the team. But the internal hires are really powerful on day one because they already have the connections across the company.
And potentially augment your own network.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned about your team being recruited for science first.
Yes.
And then you report to the CTO. So there is a risk of falling in love with a startup because you fall in love with the technology,
Yes.
a strong bias.
Yes.
How do you mitigate for that?
Oh, yes. And that was something, I'd say that's probably something we've had to, I guess, learn the hard way, for sure.
Oh, I feel like there's a golden nugget here.
Well, I mean, yeah. In early days with that science first approach, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, I think we fell into the same trap that maybe I'm sure tech transfer offices in the early days when they were thinking about spinning off IP into newcos as well. Just because you have exciting science doesn't mean it's ever going to be something that is, commercially adopted. So I think, and when you start a strategic venture fund to get insight, again, like you're not necessarily, you don't necessarily care if it's going to be commercially adopted because that could be a learning. Like we didn't start that function at LabCorp or we didn't acquire that function because there is zero commercial appetite for something like this.
Which is like saving hundreds of millions of dollars already.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could be a great strategic insight. But at the same time, I think we've become again, more mature investors and in diligence, I think some of it is just knowing, right? I think when you're like meeting the leadership team and the management team, just having an understanding of what has now worked in the past and what expertise is necessary. And even if they're a first-time founder or first-time founder CEO, if they know what they don't know and willing to take advice from different experts and they've identified the right experts, I think that's what we're really looking for. It doesn't have to be a seasoned founder every single time, but it has to be a founder that is going to surround themselves with an excellent cross-functional team.
Very nice. Then let's go wider than LabCorp. Mm-hmm. We are at GCV Monterey. What do you think about the ecosystem? What do you think is the value of meeting here today at GCV?
Yeah, no, it's great. This is actually my first time being here in person.
Okay.
But I'm really excited to go. Usually, I think it's the timing, and I actually live in North Carolina, so it's a little bit of a trek. I get to San Francisco a lot, but not necessarily to Monterey. But I started conversations with a bunch of the guys at Merck, GHI, back in 2020, 2021. We actually, with Bill Toronto's leadership, started like a healthcare console within GDCI. And so that was really great because it was still pandemic times and everyone was still doing everything virtually. But this team was meeting pretty regularly and talking about some of just, the trends in corporate venture fund investing, what it's like being in healthcare and what are some of the challenges that we're all facing. And we formed sub-teams and we were thinking about, a lot of us have kind of these strategic first mindsets, but, how do you come up with KPIs to kind of quantify strategic return? And we really learn a lot from each other because I think we're all in similar situations. Merck's been around for a while. We've actually been around for a while and had very similar conversations with other companies starting their funds as well and trying to share like as much as we can because I think those conversations are so important. I mean, everyone's always slightly different because their company's different and has different priorities and different mandates. But I do think we all share in that we want to make sure we are able to, I guess, justify the importance of continuing to make investments through a corporate venture fund. And so, establishing what some of those metrics are that everyone should be tracking, how you get that strategic insight back to the IC or your EC, is something that we regularly talk to our colleagues out here about.
Well, now I have to ask, what type of KPIs are the ones you think are the most meaningful?
So, because it's this strategic insight or strategic return, we do feel like just those interactions with the company are so important. How do you quantify that? So a lot of times it is tracking, how many board observers we have, and then how many partnerships do we have? What kind of partnerships are those? Did they result in some sort of publication so that the public eyes are seeing that there is, partnership in science ongoing? Is there a press release around the partnership collaboration? Is it a commercial collaboration? Is that commercial collaboration generating any sort of additional ROI? So in addition to the investment, are we generating revenue together? Something else that we can track. Then we look at the kind of portfolios in general, like how many of them have FDA-approved products? How many of them, I'm trying to think of other metrics, like we do track how much investment dollars they've raised all together. Obviously, if we've acquired any of the companies, so we've made 81 direct investments and acquired 3. So just how can you kind of figure out how to quantify some of those interactions and count those partnerships and count those opportunities where we were, able to together differentiate ourselves in the market, at a conference or with a press release or things that we're tracking.
Now you mentioned 81 portfolio companies. Of course, some have exited.
Yes.
But that's a lot of work, especially if most of the recent one was observer board seat. How do you manage this number of portfolio companies?
Yes. And so that is something that, again, is continuing to evolve because we've never been this big. We just continue to grow every year. And so last year was our biggest year. We actually made 11 investments. And the year before was our biggest year, and we made 10 investments.
Wow.
New investments.
So it's basically nearly monthly.
Yes. And, I think that also came with the growth of the fund. We saw growth with the team, and then the more investors that we have, like the more deal flow and deals that, have gotten through diligence. Again, I think an increase in deal flow in general, just from being in the venture fund space for quite some time.
Building credibility.
Building these relationships, So we've seen a significant increase in deal flow in the past couple of years as well, which has contributed to the number. I think also, over the past 2-ish years, we've seen less institutional venture funding. So even more attention to corporate venture funds and like who's willing to make investments in, somewhat tough times. So anyway, huge deal flow, biggest years, both years in a row. And so, we are utilizing our internal, expertise and network to do so. Our team certainly cannot take on all these board observer roles. We do take a couple, and then we do make sure we are tapping into executives across LabCorp that, helped with diligence, or maybe it is relevant to their business, so they'll be getting those insights almost immediately. Or have a certain expertise that this portfolio company could really benefit from. We work in partnership with the portfolio company to pick the type of board observer. So kind of depending on what they need, is it advice on market access and CPT coding and reimbursement, or is it R&D
That's
help?
nice. So you basically tailor the choice of the board member to what they need at that point.
Yes. Are you thinking about your exit and therefore maybe someone on a corp dev team? Like, do you want a woman? We've got lots of women that take board observer roles, and the board observer roles at LabCorp are actually, something that a lot of people want. So we are very lucky that we have a great pool of interested executives that are willing to help these companies. So anyway, that's really how we are, tracking as many of these new companies as we have is with our partners and our colleagues that we have internally.
Now, clearly, all of this, I think it's already challenging when it's inside the CVC, but here you're taking people from the mothership. Do you have like a training to make sure that before they go onto the board for the first time, they have the right expectations, they understand how they should behave and all of that? How do you do that?
So we actually do a biannual board observer training. So even the people that have been board observers before or that have been board observers for a while join the meeting. So the first half is kind of the training. And sometimes if there's not a lot of new observers, I won't spend time doing the training and I'll just kind of train someone with the same deck ad hoc. And then we try and spend the second half of the meeting on talking about not just like strategic insight necessarily, although sometimes, but more also board dynamics. Every board is so different, and so we can learn from, or new observers can also learn from hearing about people that have been observers for a long time, like, oh, I was really uncomfortable when I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to vote and I voted, and something like that, some sort of story, or I don't know what to do when they say it's an executive session, or but we try and knock those types of things out with the training. But you're absolutely right. It is important to have that conversation. We also try and make sure we have a fairly tenured person taking the role, because this role is representing LabCorp as a whole and not just themselves.
It's your brand.
Yes, it's our brand. And it's also, we want them to be able to get resources across the company from this contact. I mean, they can always reach out to our team, but also important that this contact is like, oh, I'm not the best person for this. Like, we need to go talk to the head of market access and I'll set up that meeting. So usually the person going in has pretty significant tenure as well, which is something that we look for. So it really is just like, have you ever sat on a board? If not, that's great. Like, we'll tell you kind of this is what it might be like, but we never know. And then, some board meetings I think are utilized really for the kind of getting strategic advice, from their investors, especially if they have a lot of strategic investors or corporate investors around the table. And then others, you might be the only corporate strategic, and then everything is about the finances, right? And so we've actually had situations where we'll take our first board observer member out of there and like put someone else in, because based on what's going on at the board meetings, it's not even a good use of their time, and they're not, sharing anything that's helpful because they're not being asked.
Now, you've been on many boards. What for you is a good board member?
Yeah, so again, I think it does depend on the company and what stage they're at.
Let's say early stage.
Yes, okay, early stage. But yeah, I think we always want to make sure that that we can be a good resource to them. I mean, I especially think in early stage companies, they don't necessarily have the resources, and nor should they necessarily spend all their resources to hire a ton of people. So if there's a way to build your board and utilize your board to kind of fill some of those gaps, I think that's great. So having board members that are willing to kind of take on that role, kind of get their hands dirty, if you will. A lot of our board members are, our board observers are joining, meetings that they're having with other partners, or meetings they're having with other future investors, or, weighing in on like their marketing materials, or I don't know what it is, but it can be a number of different things. And sometimes our new board observers are like, should we be going to these meetings, or do you want us to go to these meetings? And what we tell them is that you can do as much or as little as you want, but please let us know, if you feel like you're doing too much or you don't want to do this. But a lot of our board observers, again, I think it's just something kind of fun, to do, and it's a development opportunity, and it's outside of the day-to-day, and they are usually the expert around that table, or for that CEO in that space, and so it really does end up being, a nice collaboration. And we try and pick the board observers that want to get their hands dirty, want to share, don't mind being asked to go to different meetings that are outside of the quarterly board meeting, things like that.
And when there are board observers coming from the mothership, how do you get that inside knowledge back into the mothership in a way where it's respecting confidentiality?
Yeah. So we are still working on that. Not necessarily the confidentiality part, but when we start doing diligence with a company and invest in a company, we have a two-way confidentiality agreement between the company and our company. So a lot of times we are not necessarily, like a lot of times our companies are okay with them sharing. Like they know that we're a strategic venture fund, that we want that insight. We've only had one or two portfolio companies that have asked for a separate CDA between the board observer and the company. And in which case, we always, want to respect the wishes of our companies and those confidentiality agreements. But in general, like they know that they're going to be sharing the board deck with our team, and that if they want to talk about something that they think they don't want others at LabCorp knowing, then they should put that in the executive session of their meeting. But I think getting that strategic insight to especially a larger group of people, especially our investment committee and or relevant business owners, is something that we are continuing to work on and I think make better. So I'm happy to take any advice from others. But like I said, we do have that biannual meeting where we get the observers together, and we've been engaging them to share there. But then we've also created this, we don't want to give them too much work. So we've created a couple templates. One is an email template. And so the email template is for if they have a board meeting, like copy and paste this template, forward the deck. And it's so simple. It's like, what was the main highlight of today or something like that, so that you're sharing the deck and you're sharing while you're in the meeting kind of what you thought was interesting or what an insight was, or if you want to share all your notes. Some of them share all their notes, whatever's easiest for you, but trying to get them into the habit of just forwarding the board deck with their notes, like while they're in the meeting. For those that don't do that, then we have the actual, biannual meetings, or we'll ask them to come back to that relevant business advisory team and share any insight, or we'll have them tell us when it would be appropriate for the company to come back and present, which they're always willing to do. So sometimes it's more, I think it's time, let's have them back. They've got great updates, and then they have a much broader audience. And then the last piece is that we've also been trying to get it into kind of like a shareable format. And so for a while, we were trying to get the board observers, some of these are like our chief marketing officer, right? To fill out this, and again, keep it short, one pager, but not necessarily super high levels of compliance. So now what we're doing is we are actually having the CEOs fill out the one pagers. And so they can share what they think their biggest highlight of the quarter was. We also ask for other they're more like financial metrics that we're tracking, but just so that we have it all. Like, are you raising? Yes or no? Do you want us to share this information with other, investors that we're meeting with? How much money have you raised so far? Are you generating revenue? If so, how much? Like some kind of metrics that we're tracking across the portfolio. So we get that updated by them, and then we also get the updates from them on conversations they're having with LabCorp or partnerships, and also what they would want LabCorp's CEO to know about what they achieved this quarter. And I swear they all got it back to us in less than a day.
All of them?
Yep.
That's an amazing golden nugget, because it feels like you're making a big ask.
Right.
But they're all keen to share back.
Yes, but so I guess one of the ways I think we got them to do it quickly was because we said we had an IC meeting coming up. So we did give them a deadline. But we were like, we are putting this together for our CEO and the rest of the IC. What is it that you would like them to know? And it was one page. Like the CEO should know these things, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this is the way we're going to do it moving forward, and then have the board observer add anything that they want. But then that way, if we don't hear back from them, we still have an update that we can share.
Megann, it's so good to finish with that golden nugget, but
Okay.
it was a really good learning across everything you've done. And you clearly have a quite unique approach of starting with founder fund and a network of advisors and the mothership also being on the board. And all of this was quite special. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.